Welcome to the Self-Publishing Tips and Tricks Show, a series designed to give you insight into the world of self-publishing and marketing your books. Featuring your hosts, Shanon, the author behind the pen name S.C. Huston, Ben Pick, and Morgan Lee. Join us several times each month when we interview authors about their self-publishing and marketing journeys, talk to industry leaders, and discuss books about writing, self-publishing, and marketing. Hi everyone, I'm Shanon, writing under the name of S.C. Huston, and today we're doing a book review for Self-Publishing Tips and Tricks podcast. I'm joined by several guests as we informally talk about Lisa Cron's book, Story Genius, how to use brain science to go beyond outlining, write a riveting novel before you waste 3 years writing 327 pages that go nowhere, a specific title. We'll discuss what we've learned for our own author journeys and what we're taking away from the reading. Before we have our guests introduce themselves, let me give a quick update. There's nothing really new going on as far as my writing. I'm still trying to write my books, but we do have the AuthorTube Writing Conference coming up in right about a month and a half, a little less than a month and a half. So look forward to that. Now let me go ahead and introduce our guests, or they're going to introduce themselves. We'll start with returning author Emma Bennet, who has been on the show several times. I'm so honored that she has agreed to come back on again. So Emma, please tell us who you are again and anything that you would like to share, like others to find out more about you and what you have going on.
Shanon, thank you so much for having me here again. Yeah, my name is Emma Bennet. I'm a UK-based hybrid author. So most of my books are published by a traditional publisher and I write contemporary romance for them. Then I have some books which are self-published, including some non-fiction books for authors. I also have a YouTube channel, which I'm sure Shanon has linked everywhere. And I'm a freelance developmental editor, a book coach, and a writing instructor.
Next, we have Rachel, who is new to the show, but I've known Rachel for quite some time from her YouTube channel. An awesome individual to get to know, and I'm glad that she joined us to read this book. And so I'll let you introduce yourself, Rachel.
Thank you. My name is Rachel. That is the R in the R case Stumblingbear, and I have a BookTuber channel where I primarily read science fiction and fantasy. However, I was interested in this book because I am also an aspiring author, and I am currently working with my husband on publishing a self-publishing children's book.
And next, we have Devon Gambrell-Clark. Now, this is someone I've met recently, probably late last year, I believe, and I'm hoping to get her on the podcast in the next season. I actually have a spot where I was going to ask you if you come on because she has some great stuff going on for her. Something that I've really enjoyed getting to know Devon is that she embodies the spirit that we have with the AuthorTube Writing Conference. And so she has just recently joined our chairs at the AuthorTube Writing Conference. So I'm so happy to be able to welcome Devon. And please, Devon, let us know about you.
Hey, everyone. My name is Devon, and I write fantasy and steampunk. My first book, which is Crystal, is up now. I'm also the founder of All Call Indie, which is a database of freelancers for indie authors. I update it every quarter, and I'm hoping next year I can get its own website.
Hey, awesome. We're going to go ahead and talk about Lisa Cron's book, Story Genius. And Morgan, who's one of the other hosts for the podcast, actually chose this book. It was quite a while ago when we were picking out books to read. So she was not able to join us. And that's when Rachel also said, hey, I'd love to read this with you guys. I'm glad that you're able to make it. But I had heard about this book before, and actually I remembered I had referenced it in a video, and I went to go look it up, and it was in a video that I published in October of 2021, Ways to Write Faster, because if you have your scene cards, it's kind of like outlining ahead of time. Your scene cards, it can help you move faster through the story for those that plotting or things like that help with writing. So I did want to read the book, and I wanted to read it a long time. It's been on my TBR for a while. I actually bought it like a while ago, but I hadn't had a chance to actually read it until this episode. So now let me read you guys the description. Every writer's greatest fear, pouring blood, sweat, and tears into writing hundreds of pages only to realize story has no sense of urgency and no internal logic, just a complete do-over. The prevailing wisdom in the writing community is that there are just two ways around this problem: pantsing, winging it, plotting, focusing on the external plot. Story coach Lisa Cron has spent decades discovering why these methods rarely work and coming up with a powerful alternative based on the science of what our brains are wired to crave. Every story we read, it's not what you think. This revolutionary guide, Cron helps you crack the story code and create a novel, screenplay, or memoir. Keep readers riveted. Using one novelist's evolving story as an example throughout, Story Genius takes you step by step from the first glimmer of an idea, an expansive, multi-layered cause and effect blueprint, including fully realized scenes. Plumbing the nitty-gritty details of your raw idea to organically generate your story's internal logic, meaning and urgency, you'll end up with a first draft that has the authority, richness, and command of a sixth or seventh. So the idea here then is, the question I want to ask myself and to you guys, did the book fulfill the premise that's found in this book description? And I think that for the majority, yes, it did. I did enjoy the book. I found a lot of the exercises helpful. And we were talking before the podcast recording started, and I started using some of these things today, a story that I'm working on to try to work through some scenes that I didn't think were working. And I was like, I think this is why. What she talks about in this book definitely points to why my scenes that I thought weren't working, why they're not working, and what I can do to fix them. Overall, I think it's really great. I'm not sure if I agree with everything that she has in the book, but for the majority, I really did enjoy learning about the brain science and her ideas for how it works. And I especially loved all the examples, as was promised in the description. You do have the real world example of a book happening from the idea to getting those scenes done. All right. So what about you guys? What did you guys think about the promise that was in the book description?
I think that I agree with you that in general, it did fulfill the promise. If you read description on the back, if you just go by the idea that you're hacking brain science, then no. And it's a cool little subtitle that was put in there. No, what she's talking about is not hacking brain science. But I understand why it was there as part of the title, and it is very catchy. No, but going by the whole of the blurb in general, yes, and I think there's a lot of useful information in the book.
I did find it useful, and some of the exercises in there I started using in the middle of writing the second book without even reading it beforehand. So how to break it down and everything. But yeah, as far as the story flow is, I wouldn't say hacking into it. There's an innate feeling when somebody is telling a story or when you're reading a book. You just know.
I do think that the premise of the book was fulfilled. I actually didn't read the back of the book before picking it up. I went with the title. I'm like, okay, what's this about? So just reading the first paragraphs and they laid out, so it talks about, okay, you could have a story with a great idea, prose is gorgeous, there's lots of action, there's no real story, there's no driving sense of urgency. And I immediately, when I read that, I was like, oh, yeah, I have a couple stories like that. And so I think just for me that clicked. And then so reading through the rest of this book, I was like, no, I could see how following these steps will actually help me make that story better. So I do think it has fulfilled its promise.
Okay, I like to touch on the idea of the brain science. So when I read some of the reviews on this book, I think that some of the reviews mentioned that there was a book before this one that had like all the actual scientific data she was creating this book from. And I think there's only a few things that she brought into here that didn't seem it was supported. But I'm just curious, Emma, would you like to expand on that? Like the brain science that what did you say exactly? You said how to use hacking brain science, how to use brain science beyond outlining. So what part or what did you feel exactly about that?
It felt more, I mean, like I say, there's a lot of very, very good information for writers in this book. It's really useful. What she seems to be talking about is the best way to write a character-driven story. And she believes that all stories are character-driven and that the important element is to have this brilliant character and the readers completely engaged and cannot put the book down because they want to stay with them. And that is part of human nature, is to want to follow somebody's story if we feel a bond with them. So it's kind of brain science, and it's also sort of brain science the way that stories work, because as Devon was saying, stories have a certain flow, and that's throughout history, that's across all cultures. That's why you see certain same stories pop up all over different parts of the world. They're not connected at all, but the same stories, like Cinderella, for example. You see examples of that in all kinds of cultures because they're great stories, and there are only so many types of stories. We all know this. There's no such thing as a really original story. So is that brain science, or is that more just kind of what we expect as humans for stories and how we've developed to enjoy stories? I don't know.
What do you guys think about the brain science part?
So going off of what Emma said, I think the biggest part of the brain sciences in here is not how to hack your own brain, how to understand how your potential readers are going to connect with the book. She goes in a lot about the history of storytelling and how the reason why people immerse themselves in stories. And my parents are oral storytellers, so a lot of this is information that I had heard through other workshops the oral storytelling tradition. So to me, it was making a lot of sense. Like, oh, it's just the same thing in the written word. They're going into stories, try out different situations to see would they react the same way as the character. And I think that's where you get a lot of debate in communities where people are following characters and they say, oh, I didn't agree with this character's decision, because it's not a decision that the reader would have made if they had been in their place. That's essentially what she's saying is the purpose of reading and immersing yourself in stories is to try out those situations.
I have to say, I find that interesting because, I just had a review of my most current book where they're like, well, I didn't really agree with the main female character, the decisions made. I couldn't understand why she made those decisions. So because of that, I really didn't, couldn't root for her. And I'm like, well, those were her decisions. It's not yours. But I was like, okay, the readers are going to take away what they take away. So, but I remember thinking that. And I thought that as I was reading Story Genius, and I was thinking about, when she said that people follow the characters, and I'm like, what? They probably didn't like my character. But what about you, Devon? What did you think?
A lot of the same of what Emma said. And like you, I just had a review yesterday that came in and saying that the story was good, but it was so fast. It was hard to follow along. And there's so many characters. And sit back and you think sometimes life is out of control. So it's not always character driven. It's event driven. It throws the characters into chaos.
Yeah, and I was curious about that because, Emma brought that up too, how, Lisa Cron was talking about the character-driven stories, and that's what really all stories are. Do you guys agree with that statement that Cron said?
No, I don't.
No.
I'm going to be the outlier. I'm going to say I do. Even in plot-driven stories, I have found that if the character has some underlining value that is driving them, even in a plot-based story, you can sense that and you can feel it, and it will make everything make sense of why the character's making the decisions that they are.
I mean, have you come across books that just seem to be plot-driven without having that character connection?
I actually just recently read one. I'm not going to say what the name is because I DNF'd it and don't want to give it the press. But yes, it was one where I think the author did a great job of showing various characters from different points of view. So it might not be how they see themselves. However, the main protagonist, as this says, is even with a whole bunch of different characters, you'll have one that kind of stands out as the main protagonist. It didn't feel like she had a great purpose. She was more doing these things to move the plot along. And how she came off in each scene, she kept changing. And one she would snappish, when the next one she would be nice. It was weird.
I think I agree. I don't think that all stories are character driven. I think there are definitely some stories that are more driven by the plot. But I do think that's maybe a glimmer of some character development in every story. It may not be to the depth and level of what Cron is talking about here, where you have basically what she's saying is that each scene should have that third rail, which is a rail that is what represents the deep-seated desires and the misbeliefs of the character who is interacting with the plot to create the story. I definitely gravitate more toward character-driven stories, but I also don't have a big preference for literary fiction, which is very character-driven. I like plot too. So I like the merging of the two, definitely, for sure. All right, so we talked about the brain science. And for me, I think the brain science, I mean, again, there's very little brought in, but there was some that was like, yes, I've actually heard that before. Like this idea here, the prospect of endless possibilities isn't freeing, it's paralyzing. And this is a brain science that I've actually read some of the studies on this, where when people are given too many choices, it paralyzes them, they can't choose one. So when the writer, we're sitting and we're like, we got all these choices that we could, put our characters through torture to get them to grow as a character. We're like, which torture do we want today? There is a lot of choices. So I definitely could see that. So trying to figure out how that works and how we can work within our limitations. I think that's interesting. It does say that, I think this is a little bit of the brain science, but not really, is that we don't turn to story to escape reality. We turn to the story to navigate reality. And I think that would actually some people I don't think would agree with that. Like they'd read to escape. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think?
I don't read Harry Potter so that I know how to deal with an evil wizard who comes to, take over the Muggle world. Then if you think about it, you can kind of see her points, but in general, I do think that people read to escape. It's not how they're not learning how to deal with different situations necessarily. It's an escape from, regular boring life. Maybe it's, experiencing something that you wouldn't get to experience in some way.
Do we do Theodora Taylor's book together, the book review? I'm trying to remember. Yes. So remember, she talked about how romance.
The universal fantasy. just be.
Right. It provides a fantasy of it is an escape because it's not something, a housewife who has, duties and things that she's taken care of may long to escape that and have some big charming, buff alien guy come take her away, but not really. That's not life. And so it's an escape for her to be able to read about that versus, actually be in it.
My first thought on that when I listened to that passage was she was writing more of a modern day fiction than a fantasy. I'm a heavy reader of fantasy. I definitely read to escape. But in the standpoint of a modern setting, I can see how some people would read to relate to.
Again, I'm going to be that outlier because when I read that she said we don't read to escape, I was like, I feel validated because I'm always saying I am not an escapist reader. Yes, I read a ton of sci-fi and fantasy. I think it's not so much the plot of what's happening, but it's the emotional arc. Maybe that's why I'm like, yeah, for me, everything does have a character, strong basis. Using them as example, Harry Potter. It's not about dealing with the magical world. It's how do you make friends? How do you stand up to your friends and work with them to solve problems? That's what kids are learning from that book. That's what adults are learning from that book. So I've always said that I read in order to get a different view of the world. I also have a library information science degree, and reading is all about empathy. And so whatever you read can help you build empathy, even if it is sex with an alien.
And I would say that, this was a two-parter, what she said. The takeaway is we don't turn to story to escape reality. We turn to story to navigate reality. And my master's is in writing. And so from there, what I learned was it's not so much we turn to story to navigate reality. It's more about the human experience and human condition, so that empathy that you were talking about. So I would say that I feel that there's some stories that's not about navigating reality. It's all about the human experience. So that would be my thought anyways for that. All right. So Cron challenges the conventional approach of outlining before writing. She argues that traditional outlining often results in plot-driven stories that lack emotional resonance. How many of you guys outline?
Potter.
Oh, Emma. Okay, so for you then, what do you think about this argument? And do you see any potential benefits in her approach to developing stories based on what engages the reader's brain?
I can understand what she's saying, and I think that probably are writers who would just do an outline just thinking about the plot and not the kind of the character developmental arc and things like that, and making sure that they're showing exactly what the character is feeling and why they are acting the way that they are. Some things I would argue, though, that decent writer would be thinking about those things, and that you don't just sit down and write a plot without thinking about the character first. I certainly think a lot about my characters before I start plotting. But plotting works for me. I find I need to plot. I have deadlines that I need to hit, and I don't have the luxury of taking as long as I would like to write a book. And I find that plotting just helps keep me sane, really, and going in the right direction with the story. That doesn't mean that the character can't develop as I'm writing after that. I think that my stories are good despite it.
I'm not really a plotter anymore. I started off plotting, but I found I didn't really like it. But when in my master's program, one of my mentors, because every semester we had a new mentor who was a published author, she wanted me to outline everything. And I couldn't just put plot points. It was why. What's the beginning state? What's the ending state? What are the beginning emotions? What are the ending emotions? Why? So I I felt like I was filling out these outlines with so much information. I give it to her and it still wasn't what she was looking for. And I'm like, I don't know. I gave up. So I was like, but I think, maybe I just wasn't there, but I think it was kind of along this idea of what Cron's talking about, getting into that, going through all the whys until there's no more whys, and what's. But what did you guys think about, Devon and Rachel? What did you guys think about her challenge on the conventional approach to outlining?
Her questions are awesome, like questions to ask yourself. And then I sit down to write. I outline, I start off with my synopsis. The idea pops into my head of this is the story, and then I just expand on it. So the questions of why and so, I think she says, and so or why so, those are automatically running through my head anyway. So it was nothing new to me. And I don't write in order. I can't write in order. When I get to a certain point, and I'm like, all right, well, I'll leave a note, this idea, this idea, this idea, and then I'll move on. Don't stop, think about it. I wait for that inspiration to hit.
Which goes to her point where she says you must write in order, basically is what she said.
Yeah.
I definitely disagreed on the whole writing in order. But to answer your question about the challenge for outlining, when she was talking about asking all the questions about why, it reminded me of exercises I have done, or it's just really getting down to what the problem of something is or why you care about something. Most of the time when you're asked why, you give a very surface answer, but then if you keep pushing, you can finally drill down. That's kind of what I saw going on there.
Okay. And I do think it's interesting how she also only talks about the two methods. You have plotting or pantsing. I do feel there is an in-between, and I feel like a lot of people kind of fall in the in-between. Do you guys have anything you want to bring to light that you thought was interesting or should be discussed?
I like her idea of the scene cards, and that is something that I started doing. Got Campfire a couple of months ago, and it's been fantastic. Making a card with the overall what's happening, because I have multiple POVs, and in that card I can click on it and I have each individual one, how they're dealing with that same situation. That, wish I'd known that for my last book.
I kind of felt overwhelmed by scene card, looking at it, trying to figure out, like I just started thinking about my first scene, filling it out. I'm like, I feel like I would be, I know she says there's no wrong answer, but I feel like I'd be filling it out wrong.
It did seem like a lot. I thought it was a good idea. I think I would use it if I was struggling with the scene and really trying to get down to the nitty gritty of exactly what I was trying to get across to the reader. But definitely not for every scene. It would drive me completely crazy.
Yes.
I find I do something similar to her scene cards when, like normally during NaNoWriMo, when you're doing a lot of writing, I want to set myself up for the next day. In Scrivener, I'll just make myself a note going, okay, in this scene, this has to happen. They have to come to this conclusion. That way I know what I'm going to be writing for the next day. That's kind of when I do the scene cards more. I never thought about doing them at the beginning, kind of plot things out ahead of time, because I'm typically not a plotter, not like just a outliner.
Yeah, I do a reverse outline, but my reverse outline always does start with a few scene ideas before I start writing. And then I would say probably the first one works. And then after that, the rest of the scenes end up morphing into something else because it just happens as I'm writing. I do think that in the reverse outline, I probably include some of that, what she's talking about, which is getting down to like, what's the main plot point? What are the the subplots going on? But then you also have the cause and effect for the plot, and then the cause and effect for the third rail, which again is that notion of having your character move through each scene, touching that third rail at the same time, which is their deep-seated desires and misbeliefs. So the book does offer practical exercises and techniques for developing characters, plotting, and creating emotionally engaging stories. Which of these strategies or tools do you think you're most excited to try in your own writing? And I know some of us said we've already tried some of it, but what, go ahead and explain what have you tried or what do you want to try in your own writing?
For me, something that I'm looking forward to doing is that from April NaNoWriMo, I'm going through all these exercises more in depth, is looking back at those 3 past scenes that build off of the misbelief. The character feels like their misbelief was justified and it's correct, and it's gotten them to the point where they are now.
Yes, I think it's similar for me. I've realised that something I really need to work on is the misbelief on my heroine in the Regency book, which I am attempting to write at the moment. So I think I probably will make use of scene cards and just lots of questioning to try to really make sure that that is made completely clear what's going on and why she's behaving the way that she does, because I'm not sure that I've got that quite right, and the cards will probably help.
The cards are definitely helping me with 3 completely different main characters, 3 completely different ways of thinking, and they're all dealing with the same situation but coming from different angles.
Yeah. So I think I'm kind of the same lines as Rachel in that I have a romance, so there's 2 main characters, and of course, she says that you can't really have 2 main characters or 2 protagonists. You really have just one, because everyone else, their story revolves around how they're going to affect their main protagonist. So I guess I kind of think of my main protagonist being the female, my new story or my book that I'm writing. And I was like, I remember thinking, okay, she has a certain misbelief before the story even starts. And the misbelief that if she holds completely still, her family will love her. Because when she moves, her magic builds up, it erupts, and it is killed her mother by accident. So her father, and her sisters have mostly turned against her when she killed her mother, mistake. And so she's like, well, if I hold completely still, magic won't happen and they'll love me. And then the catalyst at the very beginning, the very first scene of the story, she has to make a decision what she's going to do, because basically her father's putting her in a position she's going to be killed. She's like, well, I don't want to die. I'm never going to get his love. So what else am I going to do? And I'm like, okay, now what's her misbelief? And that's what I was really struggling with as I'm writing all these scenes. And I'm like, I'm not seeing her growing. This new misbelief, or this evolution of her misbelief is not, I don't know what it is. And so this morning I did that. I sat down, okay, what's her misbelief? How does it evolve? And then like Rachel, I came up with, okay, what are the things in her past that, and Cron suggests three things from the character's past, their backstory, 3 parts of their backstory that are integral to their desire and misbelief. So it can't be just something that was random. It has to be integral to it. I think I came up with 2, but I didn't have, well, one of course would be her mother dying. That'd be the huge one. And she talks about how it should be a buildup, like, okay, this happens, and the next thing that happens that supports the misbelief is even bigger. But I was like, I don't know how to make that happen, because she's only 10 years old when she accidentally kills her mom, and now she's 200 years old. So there's lots of stuff that's happened in between that's continued to support her misbelief. Yeah, that's how I'm using it, and I've really enjoyed doing that. I don't know if I can ever get to the point of doing like a scene card the way she, has it in the book, because I do feel like I would get lost in it and I'm not sure I would actually find what I'm looking for. And I'm okay with brainstorming just out loud, like I do dictation, and I brainstorm. That's how I did a lot of this morning. I was like, okay, this is what happened. Here are 3 things that could have happened. Well, it was only 2, but that kind of stuff. So I did a lot of that out loud, but it's dictated so I can go back and read it over again. So I don't know if the scene card will work for me, but all the other exercises and techniques that she has, and she has tons, she has lots of exercises. Okay, once you have this, move on to this. Here's what you can do. So I thought those were all very, very helpful. For sure.
The whole only one main character. The second book is not going to work out like that, because I have the villain origin story one. I have another one character who's trying to prove himself, and I have another character who's trying to leave, but they're all stuck because of these events around them, and they can't move forward. So there's no really one main POV in this. So I was struggling with going through the exercises, trying to bring the focus in on just one of the 3, but I'm only halfway through, so we'll see.
One thing that I wanted to bring up was how much I liked the way that she used her friends and her friends' writing to illustrate what she was talking about. So often in writing books, you have examples from published books, especially like Save the Cat mentions lots and lots, and that's a brilliant book, but you don't really know how the writers got to the point where they were writing this brilliant example of whatever beat was talked about in the case of Save the Cat. So I really, really like the way that her friend took this idea for a story, nothing basically, and built on it using Lisa's techniques. I thought that was really, really clever. So you can actually see how they're being used by somebody else from the very creation of story.
I absolutely love that. And as it goes on through each exercise, it gets longer and longer. The examples get longer of what this other writer is doing. And so you can see the progression of how it went from this small idea to blossoming to full scenes. And I really, really enjoyed seeing that process. It made me wish that I have like a Lisa to send my stuff to and be like, okay, what? Where am I failing? But the way that she wrote it out, because a lot of what is shown in examples is written out in scenes or thought process. That's how I go through stuff. And she did transfer some of it to the scene cards, but I thought, I just don't know the scene cards would do the same for me.
I've got notebooks full of just ramble writings answering my whys.
That's good. I mean, that's her whole thing, is that you have to dig down deep into the whys. So Emma, you mentioned how you realize that your main character in your Regency, that you're not really sure what the misbelief is, or, why does she do the things that she's doing? And of course, all of this full book is about, why is your character doing this? They do have a desire. They do have a misbelief. have you guys ever read a story, a book or whatever, in which, because all of this suggests that there's going to be some type of character arc that moves in some way, whether positive or negative. What about stories that it's a flat character arc?
I have books that flat character arcs.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that in regards to what she's talking about, where you have to have like this misbelief and desire?
I think with the flat character arc, it's more overlying theme of the story. So even though the main character doesn't change or have an arc, the main character has always changed others around them, what I've noticed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the idea of the disbelief especially works for romance, which is what I write. And as I mentioned, the heroine in my Regency romance, I don't think that the disbelief she has about the hero and why she believes that they can't be together are strong enough. And that's something that I will definitely use things from this book to work on. And it will work really well for that. But I'm not so sure, maybe now that you've said it, about the genres necessarily. But I don't know, kind of murder mystery, for example. If you had like the detective, how much of Hercule Poirot doesn't go through a huge character arc in every single mystery? Yeah. So that would be an example, I think, of a flat character arc, in which case you might have disbelief about the case, I suppose. Maybe not like a big underlying disbelief.
What I got from Cron's, and she mentioned this misbelief and stuff in regards to mystery, it's usually like a bad guy or somebody else in the story who has this, which the main character reacts to. I would say this is true for like superhero stories. A lot of superheroes, take Superman. Superman never changes. He's always the same. So unless you watch the new Superman movies, but yeah. But in the comics, he's always the same. He's flat character arc. So, but yeah. What do you think, Rachel?
No, I definitely have read books where I'm like, okay, this main character didn't change. I think it goes back to they still have their own way of viewing the world, and they do have a misbelief of some type. It's just the story didn't change that. You still get to see how that is informing their worldview, how they interact with people.
Mm-hmm. But Cron says that it is the climax is when that misbelief has to be challenged and either overcome or not. So that I don't think we really get that challenge. And when I'm thinking about superheroes, I don't think we get that challenge for those type of stories. Those are the ones that first come to mind when I think about flat character arcs or superhero stories. But I think I am personally drawn to character-driven stories where the characters do have a misbelief and they have some desires, and that they're struggling to attain those goals and get over their misbelief by the end of the book. I think I'm drawn to. So this book, Cron's book, speaks to me because it is what I am drawn to in reading, and it's how I want to write. So
at the end, she talks about once you have all of this story done for your character, then you need to decide is this a standalone book? Is this a series? So I'm wondering, and I'm curious of what your guys' opinion of, because then that made me think is it possible for a character to have a misbelief that spans whole series? And so each book, maybe a little bit of progress is made, but it's not till that last book where, the misbelief really comes to have that aha moment.
I think with the series, it's a different misbelief, the main character in a different book.
Yeah, Sarah Cannon actually did a video on this, maybe 2 years ago, where she talked, because her most famous series that she has, it's the same main character in all the books. And people were asking her, or she wanted to, I don't know, I think people were asking her, she's like, well, how does the character grow from each book to each book? Well, in the first book, she has this belief that no one can love her for who she is. And then the next book is a misbelief that she can't trust friends. And so it's like something that's happened in each book that continues to develop new misbelief about how they view life, which I think could be useful if you have younger characters that are growing, because we do learn a lot as we're moving through the years of growing years. I'm not sure how useful. I think when it comes to detective novels, when you have an adult detective, might not be changing as much.
Yeah.
My next question for you guys is, how many times when you've been reading a series, you have a first book, you're like, it's great, it's stellar, they came to the end of their misbelief, and in the second book, then there's a completely new misbelief. You're struggling to see how that character would have had that with misbelief from book one. You guys ever had that?
I think about it with my own writing.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever
looking around at my bookshelves to see if I have anything.
I think you see this a lot in reviews for book series where people are like, loved book one, book two, hated DNF series. And for me, I'm thinking of the series Soulless by Gail Carriger. I love that first book. In the second book, I couldn't get through it.
Okay, so I think that it's the circumstances that changes. So that one of my favorite books from last year, beginning of last year, I read is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. And so the main character, she has her own misbelief that she's human, she's weak, because she lives in a world with vampires. It's set in an epic fantasy setting, and that, her father, is her protector, and everything changes at the end. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but it's such a huge twist at the end. It changes everything that she thought she knew about the world. And so she does go into the next book having a new misbelief. It's the only thing I can think of right now. And I was thinking about series that I've read that have the same main character, because the last series I read are different main characters. They're just interconnected stories. I also remember thinking about this when I wrote my Irish trilogy. The second book of my series was more centered on Rose. And in the first book, she's kind of like a happy person. And, she doesn't really think a lot about different things. And going into the second book, I wanted her to have a misbelief. And I was like, where should you get this? Well, I had to look at the events that affected her in the first book. Well, she's kidnapped by a leprechaun, and he takes her out to go get drunk almost every night. And so when heading into the second book, she now has drinking problem. Which then changes and she also learned about, some betrayals of trust and stuff that happened outside of her, affected her when she found out about them. So that now she has trust issues and drinking problem to go with it. So
it makes sense.
Devon, you brought out Terry Goodkind there on the screen a second ago.
This is a great first book. I've read all of them. This is the only one I kept.
And that's The Wizard's First Rule.
Yeah.
I could not get into his book. The females, all they did, every time a female was in a scene, she had to cry every single time. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired of this. My brother loves it.
I am a sucker for The Chosen One, magical item. Those two elements, I'm sold. But the main character can do no wrong the rest of the series. Like, he makes no mistakes in the rest of the series. And it's not, I had to keep reading it to find out what happened at the end. But no, this is the only book that I kept out of 12, 15 books in the series.
My brother absolutely loves that series.
I think there were like 12 books. The tail end of the series was a trilogy about his wife.
Do you guys want to talk about anything else?
A lot of the stuff that she went in there didn't necessarily talk about specific arcs or anything, but I felt it was a little reminiscent of Save the Cat. Some of the main points. I
kind of got that feeling a few times, but I can't pinpoint at the moment. But I do remember feeling like, this is kind of like Save the Cat.
I don't necessarily agree with the only one way to approach. Yeah. And this is the way.
Yeah, I think everybody works differently, and some things work for other people. Maybe tweaking it a little bit will work for you, and it's trying out different things, just working out what's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if we are good on the discussion, we'll go ahead and start wrapping up. And we have one final question before we do that wrap up, which is, what is the best tip or trick you learned from Lisa Cron's book, Story Genius?
Definitely the questions to ask yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For characters, not necessarily that you have to do every exercise to get the perfect thing down, but just have that floating in the back of your mind to know for future.
Me, the best thing I learned was the aha moment when the internal struggle gets realized or overcome. Not have to be the same thing as your plot, big battle or climax. They can happen at different scenes at different times.
Mine was the same as Devon's, but it was more of kind of a reminder. It's just to keep asking why, to keep questioning what your character is doing, why they are doing it, what's driving them, and to keep drilling that down so that you're making sure that you're getting it across to your readers and they understand your character completely.
Yeah. I definitely do like the questions that go with it, and I think that's all preliminary. You have to do that before. My best tip or trick from this book, which is I liked where in a section she talks about unlocking your plot, and she says plot is karma. And so that's not in a sense that what goes around comes around, but whatever decisions your characters make in every scene is going to have basically some type of consequence. It's a reaction and a consequence. You want to make sure that you're thinking about, well, what, if they do this, what is that? What karma is happening from that? And I think that helps in determining whether or not your scene is useful for your story. Because if there's no consequence that has any bearing on the story or the character, then why have it? Mm-hmm. So that's why I think it's one of the best things that I read in there.
I think something that she didn't mention, beta readers, alpha readers, and critique partners will help you solve most of your problems.
That's to give you conflicting information.
I got a good team of beta readers, though. I got lucky.
My main character, my book that just published, called in, he remembers all of his wives that he's ever been married to. He remembers them in detail. Well, in my alpha copy of the story, he remembers the one woman that he was in love with. And I just explained that she's a water fae and whatever. So that's some of my readers who said, well, what's her name? And I thought that would make sense for his character, that he would remember her name because he remembers all his wives in detail. It's a way of punishing himself for having to marry over and over again according to the curse. So I put the name in there. In my beta copies, I had a couple of readers like, we don't need to know her name. I'm like, well, it goes with his character, so I'm keeping it. This was actually a really great discussion. And I think overall, we all agree that there are parts to the book that was definitely useful in helping us in the way we're going to approach our writing in the future. And maybe not the whole thing. We may not agree with everything, but there was definitely parts that were very, very useful. I would recommend it as a read for anybody. I don't know if it's as great as Before You Waste 3 Years Writing 327 Pages that go nowhere, but I do think it is a really good book. So thank you guys for coming on with me today. I really appreciate the time that you guys took to read the book and come on and discuss it with me. Links for Emma, Rachel, and Devon are in the show notes for the podcast and in the description box for YouTube. Thank you so much to our listeners and viewers. We'll be back on June 15th with another book review on Amazon Keywords for Books by Dale L. Roberts. And that is perfect timing. It's right before the AuthorTube Writing Conference. And he is one of our special guest speakers. So we can learn a little bit about him before we actually see him talk. And that will do it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much to our incredible listeners and viewers for joining us on our exploration of everything self-publishing. We hope you found our podcast to be a treasure trove of insights and inspiration. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform or thanks on our YouTube episodes. Don't forget, you can catch all of our past episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms. Keep writing, keep publishing, and we'll see you next time.